thank all of you so much, like I said, for spending your lunch hour with us. This will be a really wonderful, really engaging conversation. For those of you who haven't had a chance to meet me yet or who haven't attended a Virginia Club event before, my name is Amelia Wald, and I'm the Executive Director of the Virginia Club of New York. Although we are based out of New York City normally, we are very fortunate in this virtual landscape to connect with UVA alumni, parents, and friends from all over the country. So with that, I'd like to give a few housekeeping tips. The first is that we will leave a significant portion of today's event for audience Q&A. We're going to leave about half of the event for audience Q&A. So as questions pop into your head for our panelists, feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Your questions will be visible to other members of the audience, and you as an audience member can there's a little thumbs up button, the questions that you really, really want the moderator to ask. So that will cue to us which questions to pose to our panelists as we switch to audience Q&A. And when you ask your questions, we would love if you would include not only your name, but also where you're calling from so we can get a feel for all of our alumni calling in from around the country. I know sometimes folks like to include class years or your school of graduation as well, which you're welcome to include at your comfort level. So it is my honor to introduce Christy Lockwood, who is an assistant professor of commerce at UVA. She researches in organizational behaviors and cultures, if I remember that correctly. And before beginning her academic career, she had her own career in the hotel industry. So she comes from a hospitality background, an organizational management background, and we are so excited to have her as our moderator today. So I'm going to turn the rest of the conversation over to her.
Thanks, Amelia, and thanks everyone for joining us. Again, I'm Christi Lockwood. I'm an assistant professor of management at the McIntire School of Commerce. I'm delighted to be your moderator today for what I anticipate will be a really fascinating panel discussion. I'm joined today by Jacqueline Grace, a 2010 graduate of the Darden School and senior vice president and GM at the Tropicana Atlantic City, which is part of the Caesars Entertainment Company, as well as by Sarah Raymond, a double Wahoo with degrees in French and Foreign Affairs, as well as in Business Administration, also from Darden. Sarah is currently the COO of Context Travel, which is known for expert guided cultural and historical tours. So thank you, Jacqueline and Sarah, for lending your expert insights today. I'm personally really excited to learn from you both, and I'm sure that our attendees are eager to hear from you and not from me. So let's jump in. So to get us started, I'm curious to know if you had to choose one or two words or phrases to describe how the COVID pandemic has impacted the hospitality sector, broadly speaking, what would they be and why?
So I'll jump in and I'll choose a word that's going to be super obvious, but it's super appropriate. And the first word that comes to mind is devastating, right? And it's been devastating, again, in the obvious way on business and revenues and financial performance and all of those things that we care about. But for me, more pointedly, and I'd say more importantly, it's been absolutely devastating to the communities in which we operate, particularly bricks and mortars, hospitality businesses. And so if you think about the nature of, hotels, casinos, resorts, food and beverage establishments, et cetera, the workforces that are employed by all of those businesses, those people, right? Those are people whose livelihoods have been incredibly impacted by the pandemic. And so, one of the things that have kept me up at night from the very beginning, and it's still top of mind for me, is how are we taking care of our team members and our community? And that's all because of that one word. This has been truly devastating.
Yeah. I'll also start with a negative. I would actually say trauma, for us, March and April and even parts of May were traumatic. We said goodbye to most of our staff. So like Jacqueline, I think that's where it really hits home. And then while we're not quite exactly a brick and mortar, we are a live in-person tour operator. And so we've seen the impact in cities around the world. And the tour guides that we work with in Rome or in London or, where have you, for many of them, depending on what type of guide they were, their income went to zero. So that's, it's traumatic. I can add a second word too from our experience, which is more positive, which is, I thought about this. I did not use innovation, but I did choose creativity. We definitely have been an example of necessity being the mother of invention at Context, and feel very fortunate that we landed on something and that our existing product and our existing community actually allowed us to land on that in a weird way relatively easily. But the creativity that we've seen among our own staff, among the experts we work with, probably to a lesser extent among our customers, but even with them, it's been enormous and exhausting. Like everything is new right now. But that's been one positive.
Thanks, that's great. Not, it's sad, to hear words like devastating and traumatic, and I'm glad to hear, a couple of positives seem to be kind of coming out in terms of creativity and in terms of innovation. But I think it'd be disingenuous, really, to talk about the pandemic and to talk about the hospitality industry without acknowledging the immense loss in terms of jobs and opportunities in this sector. I read this morning that in December alone, there were 500,000 jobs that were lost in the U.S. sector, in the U.S. hospitality sector. So this is really, having a profound impact on what's going on in this sector, to sort of echo the points that I know both Jacqueline and Sarah are making here. One of the things that I noted in learning about the backgrounds of both of our panelists was that you're from two related but distinct parts of the hospitality industry. So on the one hand, we've got Jacqueline, who's involved with casinos and gaming and entertainment. And on the other, we have Sarah, who's involved with guided tours and education. And so I'm curious to dig in a little bit further to hear about what's unique, if anything, about how the pandemic has affected each of your subsectors. And to that end, to hear a little bit about the distinctive challenges that maybe you faced in those subsectors.
I'm happy to take a turn going first if you want.
Sure.
And I'd be curious, anyway, so one thing that I've felt early on in the pandemic and trying to look back a little bit is that for guided tours, and we operate mainly in Europe and a bit of Japan and a bit of Mexico, those are like our main markets, American Canadian travelers outbound to those destinations. So we were affected very early. We started seeing Japan travel suffer in February. We started seeing Italy travel suffer at the end of February and beginning of March. And then obviously maybe we all remember, I vividly remember when the US suspended flights to continental Europe right before the middle of March. And the very heavy flow of cancellations we had already been receiving became a total onslaught. So I think one thing for us that was unique was we were sort of a I don't even know the word, but we were sort of early in the bad experience and showed kind of what was then to come for a lot of the more local, maybe domestic or city-based services, especially if I think about restaurants. So we were I remember having friends being like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And a month later it flipping and me being like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" We've already come through the worst of this in a weird way. So I think timing for us was one unique thing that we were early on. A distinct challenge that I don't know how distinct of a challenge we faced. I know others in our sector face this challenge, but was what to do about cancellations and refunds and credits. We take a lot of advanced bookings, and we used some of that for operational cash. So we were in a real cash crunch in end of March and April. And there was a point in time where we were we could have 5 weeks of runway right now, maybe even 3. And I know there were other tour operators in similar boats where they take all this money up front and then deliver the service in the high season. So those are a couple of things that came to mind for me.
Great.
So, I'll say for the gaming industry, the thing that comes to mind, what's actually interesting, and, to the point earlier about a learning or something that was as a positive, it's with respect to our customer demographics. So if you think about gaming and the traditional customer demographic, it skews a little bit older, right? And so for obvious reasons, like our older customers are going to be a little bit, hesitant in coming back out once we reopen. And so what we found upon reopening was that, given some of the risks, a lot of our traditionally, older clientele stayed away, right? They were hesitant in coming back. And so what that meant, however, was that we saw a lot of new customers, which was a good thing. And the customers who were coming, and this is again, initially upon reopening, the customers who were coming skewed a little bit younger. So the upside for that was that we were welcoming new customers to the resort here in Atlantic City. And, they were folks who have either never experienced Atlantic City before, or they were able to experience it differently because there was, for lack of a better word, room for them, right? They were able to afford to get into the hotel now, where previously they couldn't get into the hotel previously. So, I think that was one of the things that's specific. As far as the challenges, I think similarly, I don't know if it's specific to gaming, but, thinking about and planning for how do we reopen these businesses and operate them safely was a huge challenge. And one that, was not taken lightly. We spent months planning with senior leaders and scientists and medical professionals and, a whole community of folks to ensure that we put protocols in place that would keep people safe. And, if you can imagine, again, just like the size of these businesses, all that entails, but we were able to do that and do that successfully and do that consistently. And we are still maintaining those protocols, which is something about which I'm incredibly proud. If you think about everything that people have been asked to do, COVID protocols is now another job description, ultimately. And it's a priority for all of us. So it's a challenge, but something that the team has met, and I'm grateful for that.
And one of the things that I'm excited to sort of hear coming through in how you describe some of the challenges that are unique to each of your subsectors is, that it seems like while there were real considerable challenges, there were also some promising opportunities, right? In that, Sarah, as sort of a first, as someone who was a company who was hit early on, you kind of had an opportunity to almost be a first mover in terms of innovation. And on the gaming and the lodging side, Jacqueline, you sort of had this opportunity to kind of rethink what your client base looks like and how you're reaching out to perhaps younger customers as well as your sort of more traditional, like you said, sort of slightly older customer. And so I'm curious if you could dig into some of those dynamics a little bit more, kind of thinking about the impact that COVID has had on your business strategy as you've responded to this global public health crisis, what's changed, but also what's stayed the same, and how have you maybe returned to some of the core competencies of what maybe you've always done or what you've always sought to do. So what's changed and what's stayed the same in terms of business strategy?
I'd go first. So, I would say one thing that changed is similar to kind of where I ended my last point, and that is the priority on safety. Mm-hmm. So like above and beyond everything else we think about is safety. How do we keep our team members safe? And then how do we keep our customers safe? And so, as I said, it really has become a part of the job description here, which is just different. So I'd say that's one thing that's changed. And, again, I think we've done a really great job at that. And something that I'm proud of. So that's one. Two, then I would say, continuing to be incredibly disciplined in how we operate the business. And, to your point about business strategy, thinking differently about what we're prioritizing. So it's, the obvious, but it bears stating, right? There are multiple aspects. If you think about, these businesses here in particular in Atlantic City, you have the casino and you have the hotel, you have food and beverage, you have entertainment, right? Because they're truly integrated resorts and tons of things to do. And now there are some things that are not operating because of just the restrictions, But then there are others that we have choices to make. And some of the ways that we've thought about it was really focusing on what are high margin aspects of the business, right? So ensure that what we're doing is profitable and it makes sense and it's still providing an experience that our customers, want and are looking for. And then on the flip side, perhaps if there are low margin aspects of the business that have always traditionally been so, but we offered them anyway because they were loss leaders, there were amenities that people were expecting, we're thinking differently about operating those at this point in time. So from a strategy perspective, we've made sure that we've been disciplined, financially, so that we can try to come out on the other side of this in a good spot. And then what has stayed the same, I'd say, is our, continued focus on customer service. So we want to make sure that the folks who are coming have a great experience above and beyond everything else. And so we've continued to make that a priority for us.
Yeah, ours has changed in many different ways. I mean, unlike you, Jacqueline, like we haven't reopened. You could probably count on my two hands how many tours we've run since March. It's not zero. Like we did run a handful in August and September, but that's about it. So we really gave up everything about our old business, which means that in some ways our strategy has fundamentally changed, and in other ways there are so many things that haven't. So the product strategy has temporarily changed, right? We launched a new virtual product that at first we thought no one was going to be interested in. And then like every month we're surprised and humbled by the number of people who were interested in it. So our product strategy has changed, not so much that we'll not go back to what we already did. We actually think the two things will feed each other, our in-person business and our online business, and that they'll complement each other. So that'll be a fundamental change going forward. The other change that I sort of alluded to when I was talking about the refunds and the cancellations, like some of our financial management practices will have to change. Like we won't be able to use as much of our advanced bookings for operational cash anymore. It would be nearly fraudulent with with what we learned over the last year, given how close we were to running out of cash. Something about how we manage refunds and cancellations will have to change going forward. But then some of the things that stayed the same, Jacqueline, what you said kind of echo for me. We really wanted to still be around for our customers. So that was a big piece of it. And we're kind of a marketplace. So we really wanted to be around for our guides as well. And throughout this last almost year, their experiences have been a real guiding factor in how we make decisions, whether it was the financial experience of guides and how we were paying them, thinking through the customer experience of what product we're delivering and what they're interested in. And then looking ahead, if I think about the existing part of our business, and we're not there yet, but we're going to have to figure out how to become more flexible than we previously were. So by that, I mean more open to last minute bookings, more open to last minute changes, more open to people asking to do this like really special thing that's not necessarily something we generally offer. I think we're going to have to apply some of the creativity we've demonstrated this year to the existing part of our business, which is, I mean, we're not a startup on that front. We're almost 2 decades old on the touring front. So there's definitely some like baggage and legacy there that we're going to have to revisit.
And for what it's worth, if you don't mind me kind of chiming into that, for what it's worth, different businesses, but I did want to add that one of the trends that we are seeing now is exactly what you just said, lots of last minute bookings, right? So which was something that we had to adjust to, right? So we're used to, number one, our booking window being a lot further out, and we're able to forecast more accurately. And over time, since the pandemic has started, we've had to adjust that. And our forecast accuracy has been, kind of up and down a little bit. Now, again, the upside of that is because they're coming, but they're deciding somewhat at the last minute. And so, that's been a change for us. And then similarly, we're seeing a lot of same day reservations. So, a ton of folks will come down, again, literally, kind of day of, like, hey, let's get in the car and go to Atlantic City, which I think is one of the benefits of where we are. Particularly if you think about kind of major metropolitan areas like New York City, you can get to a resort kind of destination without having to get on a plane, which some people I think are still hesitant to do so. So we're seeing a lot of same day bookings, which again has caught us off guard at first from an operational perspective, because we're like, we weren't expecting all of these people, but it's a good problem to have ultimately. So I just wanted to share that I think that trend, you'll see more of that trend moving forward.
And sorry to add, like your point about people doing things close to home. Like we do have tours in New York, Philadelphia, Boston, Washington. They're not our strongholds. They're not where we have done our kind of bread and butter in the past. And we've had a lot of questions on our mind of like, is this what people want to do right now? Do they really want to meet another human outside? But it is a thing that we're looking ahead to this spring and summer of people who maybe aren't ready to get on a plane yet, but they might want to rediscover their own city or road trip to Charleston or Savannah or New Orleans. And so we're looking at like domestic expansion as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's really fascinating. I wasn't quite sure what to anticipate in terms of, what might be similar and what might be different, given that you're working in pretty distinct parts of the hospitality field, the hospitality industry. But I'm struck by how similar some of the things that you talked about are, right? You're thinking about safety, you're thinking strategically about, financial management and prioritization of, existing activities and sort of new competencies. One of the things that really shine through, at least for me, and the answers that you both articulated related to how customer-centric the field of hospitality, it fundamentally really is about the customer. And I think that presents a bit of a tension in that when we're thinking about safety and we're thinking about, protocols that need to be put in place to keep people healthy, both our employees and our customers, that those could potentially detract from that personal touch. And so I'm going a bit off script here, but I'm curious if you could both speak just a little bit to how you're thinking about maintaining, a real sort of high touch experience when there can't literally be high touch.
That's a good question. So one thing, so again, Jacqueline, like you, many of our customers are on the older side. They may have kids that have gone off to college. They may even be retired, but they're probably not as much beholden to like the school vacations. We have some of that, but, one thing that's really changed is their tech savviness around Zoom. So our product is on Zoom, and our current product is on Zoom, and our customers are on Zoom. And I do wonder and suspect if being able to leverage that and find ways, for what our product is, which is often a private tour, so it is very personal. If there's further opportunity to engage online, like before someone's even traveling, and help them think through what they might do. And it might result in our product shifting again. Like maybe we're not doing as much of the physically getting together and leading a tour, and we're actually instead doing like a prep call with people of here's how we recommend experiencing like ancient Rome. That said, I think people are going to be really excited to connect with other people in person. So my common sense says that people will still want to be together, and that once they're vaccinated, not everyone, but a lot of people will want to go back to what they're used to. Maybe that's naive.
I sure will.
No, me too, by the way. I would say, so we're obviously operating, and we're operating most aspects of the business. There's some that we're not, like the spa isn't open, we're not doing entertainment because we're not allowed to, etc. But you can obviously come to the resort and you can stay in a hotel, you can eat in a restaurant. There are restrictions with capacity, the number of folks you can put in a restaurant, you have to be distanced, you have to have in your mask unless you're eating, all of those things. You can still play a slot machine, it's socially distanced. You can still play the table games, there's shields, all this, all of these protections. So a lot of this experience our customers can still have, right? They're still having right now. And so I don't think it's that different, right? They're choosing to come because they can still do most of everything that they would want to do. I'd say the one aspect that is missing and that I'm looking forward to returning are special events. So, for our core customers, like repeat visitors, like we often do, a ton of different types of special events, whether it's, dinners or parties, socials, and obviously you can't do any of that stuff right now. So I'd say that's the one aspect that's missing, that I'm selfishly and personally missing because I enjoy that. That gives me an opportunity to really interact with our customers that we just aren't doing right now, that I am looking forward to returning, and I believe our customers are as well.
Thanks. One of the other things that is sort of striking me about the responses that you've both given to the questions that we've had to this point is that you either spoke directly to or alluded to the impact that the pandemic has had, not just on customers and on business, like external facing business strategy, but also on employees and on leaders and the organizations that you're a part of. And so I'm curious if you could speak briefly to how your organizations have been managing that, and what you see as the future in terms of employment in the hospitality sector. For instance, how are we going to keep people engaged? How are we going to bring employees back once recovery has been accomplished?
I'll start. One of the things that I'll say is, as challenging as last year was for everyone, a bright spot for me was watching the organization step up. And there are just a ton of things that we did to take care of our team members, and everything from when we had to first start shutting down properties back in March. We provided bridge pay for, the population until their unemployment benefits kicked in. We continue to pay for medical benefits. We donated food to communities. And then we also created an employee assistance fund, which was funded by, senior leaders as well as vendors, partners, et cetera. And it was a place where team members could go, and if they were having financial hardship, apply and get financial support, and they were grants, not loans. So that's just some of the things that we've done to support our team members, and I'm really proud of. And there are ways that we are continuing to do so. So, I'd say for us, I tell people all the time, these businesses, they're giant people businesses, right? Like, this is a box. And, there are a bunch of boxes, but these boxes don't run if you don't have people in here to actually make them happen. And so putting a priority on our team members is, like, first and foremost, the most important thing that we could do in taking care of them. So I think we've done a good job at doing that, and we will continue to do that, moving forward. As far as opportunities, as we, move further through this and restrictions open up, then we'll absolutely, open up other parts of our business, get back to full staffing, and there will be opportunities for people to come back to work. So looking forward to those days as well.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because we're small and we were in such dire straits so quickly. The other thing that was interesting for us is we had and continue to have a decently significant European employment footprint. Please, no one ever ask me about employing people in Europe. I'll curl into a ball and crawl under the table. So it was a double-edged sword. In some countries, we're not allowed to lay people off, but those we weren't allowed to lay people off, but we were allowed to furlough, and they got support from their government. Other countries we were allowed to, and we were confident that those staff would get really good support from their government, versus the US staff who, as we all know, it's a different government model, and there's less of a social safety net. So it was hard because we weren't in much of a position to do much financially. We at the time of laying off, we did our best to act as quickly as possible. We didn't want to drag things out or do death by 1,000 cuts. We did one huge cut. It was shocking, but we haven't had to do another. And so I do think like that is one way in which we've safeguarded the sort of emotional well-being of the remainers. That it was one horribly painful like trauma, to go back to that word. And then we recovered and we got past it. And we have had opportunity to hire some people back, which has felt great. Not nearly like a significant number, but I mean, the best that we're trying to keep the business a going concern so that one day we can continue, like bring back more of our staff if they are looking for work and won't work with us. So yeah, it was sort of like, how do we navigate losing a lot of staff? It was a definitive goodbye to many of them. And then how do we make sure that those of us that are like still here and having to run the business and keep it going, that like we're gonna be like emotionally okay. And we're like a tight group, a tight culture. We already operated on Zoom before because we're such a distributed company. So in some ways we were fortunate that like not everything was pulled out from under us in terms of working norms all at once. And we tried to be as transparent as possible, which you can be as a pretty small business. So we all were on pay cuts for a while. We were able to come back to full, and we've just, as a leadership team, tried to be really transparent about when and why and what might allow us to go back to full, et cetera.
Great. I hear, as a professor of OB, I hear all kinds of best management practices coming through in the responses that both Sarah and Jacqueline articulated. I know it's about time to move into our audience Q&A, but I want to end this portion of our discussion on maybe a bit of a lighter note, as we've gotten back into a little bit of the devastation and trauma that obviously is there. But I wanted to end by sort of asking each of you to speak to one innovation that you're particularly excited about, or that you've been surprised by, and that you see maybe potentially sticking around.
I can start. So one of the things that we saw, particularly here in Atlantic City, when we first reopened in the summertime, indoor dining was not allowed. And so because indoor dining was not allowed, and obviously that's part of the experience, we had to get super creative in figuring out how do you feed people. And so that led us to move to outdoor dining and get really creative in the spaces that we use to execute an outdoor dining. And what we found was that people really enjoyed it. So even once indoor dining was allowed, people still preferred to be outside. Now, yes, that's because, I think people felt safe, right? There's a sense of safety being outside, but also the feedback that we got was people just like being outside. We're like, duh, right? Like we're by the water, right? By the beach, it's fantastic. So one of the things that we're looking forward to is figuring out, okay, how can we do more things outdoors? How can we provide, enhanced outdoor experiences? And so I'm personally excited about that because like I love being outside myself. But also I think you can do really fun things, right? And expand that beyond just dining, but just providing entertainment outside. So that's what we're going to be working on and thinking about for the spring, and hopefully have something really cool in place for the summer.
Very cool.
I was trying to think of something outside of like our entire new business line, like this virtual context conversations product. That obviously has been a huge innovation for us that's come out of it. I think the second thing is way less visible, but again, so we're a small business, sort of owner operated for about 15 years, and then became private equity owned and hired a new CEO and leadership team. And we, because context predates so much of the like off the shelf booking and e-commerce software. Our whole travel website and backend was custom built, custom engineered, and had A, enormous amounts of tech debt, and B, a pretty expensive and engineer intensive tech team behind the product. And tech was like often a blocker for us, both commercially and like we couldn't do add-ons on our website, which seems so simple. And also internally, like for process scaling, we had a lot of inefficient processes, and so you'd have to hire people for that. And we had a tech team's expensive, so we said goodbye to the entire tech team except for a product manager. And we've built the new product on first Eventbrite, actually, then Wix, and now Shopify. And we are starting to custom build some stuff, and we're using contracted engineering at the moment. But when this is all over, I suspect our old sort of site and admin infrastructure that will migrate over to the new, rather than us going back and building or rebuilding the old. And so I think it's not as visible, but I think that'll speed us up for years to come, in terms of making changes and improving customer experience and improving guide experience. So that's a pretty big innovation for us, I think, aside from the product itself.
That's great. So some really interesting innovation, both on the tech side, but also sort of on or maybe on the high tech side, but also on perhaps the lower tech side, with outdoor dining and those kinds of things. So great. Thank you for sharing those interesting insights. I'm going to move to some audience question and answer now. So our first question is one for Jacqueline from Darren. Darren asks, do you see the composition of the revenue percentage from your various sources, rooms, gaming, restaurants, entertainment, convention, etc., changing internally from pre-pandemic to post, changing materially, from pre-pandemic to post?
So yes, right now, long-term, hopefully, right, it kind of goes back, but yes, right now, and a lot of that is just a function of restrictions, right? So you can't have conventions. For all intents and purposes, you can't have conventions, so that revenue is gone. Food and beverage is reduced down to 25% capacity, as I alluded to earlier. So like we have some, but nowhere near what it was before. So I think, just if you look at just those two examples, that our spa isn't open, et cetera, just by the sheer virtue of that, yes, our revenue composition has changed. Now, again, once restrictions are rolled back and we reopen, hopefully, that goes back to what we saw before, but for right now, it has changed materially.
Great. Our next question is from Justin, and actually speaks to some of the ideas that we touched on when we were talking about some interesting innovation. So Justin asks, how do you see social eating and restaurant dining changing over time? And in particular, and I think this is where this question diverges a bit from kind of what we talked about with regard to Caesars in particular, what happens with small and mid-scale restaurants?
Gosh, I actually wonder that too. I don't know, Jacqueline, how much of an answer you have. I don't have a huge answer other than to say I think it probably relates on a variety of factors. I think some may have gotten luckier than others in terms of have they found an alternate like product approach. I'm sure that like leases have come into play for many. I doubt the demand for them will be gone, but I just don't know which will still be around. I don't know, Jacqueline, if you've got more insight than I do.
I don't know, not a ton, other than to say, while I know there's lots of the small and mid-sized restaurants that have been challenged, like no doubt, I have also been incredibly impressed with how resilient they've been. And, there are still, quite a few establishments that are making it through. Again, there are those who have suffered consequences, don't get me wrong. But again, I want to tip my hat to the folks and the proprietors who have, persevered and pushed through. And, they've gotten creative with their menu and how they execute their menu. And I'm sure they've done some things with pricing, to kind of make it work for them. But I think a lot of them have weathered the storm and believe that they'll come out on the other side. I also feel like a lot of them have also learned, what we did as well, outdoor dining. And so, you've seen folks get super creative, especially in New York City. I've just seen it kind of on TV, but how creative people have gotten with still providing their services outside. I think some of that stuff might stick.
Yeah. And it's interesting on the customer front.
Yeah.
We all want these businesses, institutions, we want them to be around.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a bit of philanthropy, for lack of a better word, and generosity from customers who are in the position to provide it. And I know that's certainly, we have people that have left us with enormous credits. Thank you. Really, really tens of thousands of dollars that we would have had a hard time refunding. So there is some philanthropy. I think that's come into play, that we'll be grateful for, not just as context, but as consumers, all of us, when some of these places make it through.
Thanks. The next question is from Charlotte. Charlotte says, one thing that I've been hearing from a lot of colleagues in the restaurant and hotel industry is that the constant pivot is exhausting. What do you both think about the conflict or synergy of a constant pivot versus a coherent brand?
To me, these are actually two different things, because the constant pivot, I'm exhausted, and we're doing strategic planning for 2020 run right now and guessing at what the org should look like now versus at the end of the, and it's exhausting. I mean, my brain is exhausted. I don't feel at all like we have an incoherent brand. If anything, I think this year has strengthened our brand, and what we've done is enormously consistent with our brand and our core mission and values, and actually more consistent than some of the tours we give. We're a highly nerdy educational tour company, but when people go to Rome, they want to go to the Colosseum and the Vatican, and you don't say no to that and stay in business. So we're actually doing a lot more of the esoteric, niche, super obscure content that's almost more brand aligned than some of what we did on the tours front. So I don't worry about the brand being coherent, but we're all exhausted. No one has had a job description in 6 months. That we're ready to kind of move forward a little bit more steadily.
Yeah, I don't have a ton to add other than to say I understand and empathize with the exhaustion. I think everyone is, for a ton of reasons. And then that, just kind of similar to your comment before about folks being philanthropic, I also think people are being forgiving, I should say.
Yes.
So yeah, even if it is somewhat disjointed for those who are, or whose brands are somewhat disjointed, I think people are somewhat forgiving right now, right? And I think the priority for most folks trying to have some kind of hospitality experience is, am I safe? And is this experience enjoyable? Is this something that's helping me take my mind off of everything else that's happening? And anything beyond that, I don't know that people are really prioritizing right now. That might be us, really smart folks worried about brand. I don't think they are. That's just my 2 cents.
Thanks. So now a question from Marcus. Have you seen a difference in performance through the crisis among players who have taken either A, a ramp down and mothball operations approach, versus a B, let's reposition this through mergers and acquisition or remodeling, for example? What do you believe will work better for the coming future, sort of midterm?
I have a very strong feeling on this.
Go for it.
Because we thought we were taking a mothball. We thought we were going into hibernation. That was the layoff we did, was a hibernation layoff. And then we saw a ton of demand for this random thing we were trying, and we've built a whole new product line. And forgetting actually for a second about us as a company thriving in this time, which I think we will, we're acquiring customers much faster than we did before. And Jacqueline, it sounds like you guys may be seeing some positive trends there too, just tapping into different types of customers. But I think really about our tour guides. So we have about 1,200 tour guides around the world, and about 200 of them have participated in the online experience so far. And I guarantee you when people start traveling, they're going to ask specifically to be led around by the people with whom they've developed an online relationship. And the guides that didn't do this are going to suffer much longer. And the guides that did do this are going to rebound and probably actually accelerate because of the visibility they've brought to themselves. So I think like it's a little bit less for us as a business. Like, yes, we've managed to preserve ourselves. I think kind of by having this other product line, we might have survived anyway. But our guides around the world will have enormous differences in experience this year and next year and the year after based on what decisions they've made about getting involved in this product. So I think it'll work better for the people that participated.
I don't have anything additional to add.
Great. All right, then our next question comes from Emily. So as you learned lessons from the wind down and restart so far, what lessons will you apply moving forward into what will likely be a rocky recovery?
I'd say, I think I talked about this earlier, we've had to be incredibly disciplined financially, really focusing on, high margin aspects of the business, and then questioning the true value of kind of underperforming aspects of the business. And so I think as we move into recovery, we need to keep that financial discipline. And I think the companies that do that, that really force themselves to continue to operate efficiently, will rebound faster, right? It's tempting to say, okay, the world is opening up. And then like you just open up the doors and do everything that you were doing before. But, I think our strategy is going to be being selective and thoughtful about what we reopen, kind of test things a little bit, see what's really needed, and then make decisions that way so that we can try to preserve our margins as much as possible.
Sarah?
I think I don't have a ton more to add. The financial management is definitely a component.
Yeah, I think those are great points. I anticipate, or I'd imagine that the temptation might be to just sort of, to Jacqueline's point, throw open the doors and sort of do everything that we were doing before. But I think it will be a challenge and an opportunity to kind of take this more, this more careful, more nuanced, more well-considered, financially prudent approach. So the next question actually then is for Sarah from Susan. The pandemic highlighted some of the exploitative aspects the travel, especially the cruise industry might have. So do you see changes in the industry going forward to address these kinds of issues?
The grimace was because, oh God, did my mom ask this question? Because my mom, it was not the question itself. I'm also laughing because one of our first 3 online seminars was about the ecology of Venice and the sort of the port and canals of Venice and environmental impact of things like cruises. So I really wonder, I don't totally have an answer. I suspect that I actually think it'll depend a lot, not just on customer demand, but also on government decisions. Like now that so much, one sort of, again, positive thing of losing so much, right? Losing all cruise traffic, losing all tourist traffic to the Vatican, et cetera, is you get over that loss aversion all in one go. And you can decide how to build back and which components to bring back or not. And I say this again, like almost from the perspective of the city of Venice or the city of Rome as anything, like maybe they will change their regulations about how many ships can enter. But I kind of think about it from that regulatory perspective of like, it'll be up to the local governments. Cause I do think, no, 2021 and 2022, they won't be as busy. Like just customer demand won't rebound that quickly, at least for international travel. So there won't be as many because the demand won't be as high. But once demand starts to come back to like 2019 and forecasted 2020 levels, like I think it could go back to where it was unless governments make a decision to the contrary. We can make some decisions as a private company, but at the end of the day, we do have investors who want to see us grow, and we can't decide not to go to the Vatican.
Any thoughts to that end, Jacqueline?
Nothing that comes top of mind.
Okay, well, we'll wrap up with one last question from Mitch. So Mitch says, historically, college students have pursued internships to learn the hospitality business. It's a very hands-on industry or business. So with even traditional employees experiencing significant layoffs, how do you see the future of internships reemerging?
I'll take this one because I'm passionate about this. And I'm passionate about like talent and talent development in general. And we should always be thinking about talent and building a pipeline. So I would say even with, our staffing levels lower, like I believe that there will be opportunities for internships. Because again, you think long term, right? Like we're going to get through this. We all will get through this and we'll get on the other side. You don't want to find yourself on the other side now looking back and saying, hey, like I have a lack of talent that can step in and do some of these roles, these stuff that run these businesses. So a little bit of a long answer, but I would say I would be encouraged because I think that we're still going to need people and there will be opportunities for internships.
I share that outlook in a way. I also graduated college in 2006 and with like a liberal arts degree. So I wasn't highly marketable when the recession hit. I was employed, fortunately, but it was sort of one of the reasons why I went to Darden. So I'm actually not worried about internships. I think those will abound. We'll be excited to invest in low cost labor, and we actually already are, but similarly, we'll be excited to start like growing our ranks again. But it's hard for me to imagine that people in positions maybe like I was 10, 12 years ago won't have setbacks. Like, yes, we'll hire interns, but it might be someone who's 18 months out of college as opposed to just in between college summers, because that person with 18 months is still looking for work and has some great experience they've logged in their like year and a half since graduating. So I experienced it myself that like employment options were slimmer, and my confidence as an applicant at that time was lower, just given the job market. And I realistically do suspect that some of that will manifest here, even if, yes, we're excited to bring on junior staff, and yes, we're excited to bring on junior employees. I suspect that there will be more of them seeking, and it may take longer for them to find positions if it's anything like it was. I'm not saying negative, but
it's particularly interesting for me to hear your responses to those questions. I'll be eager to pass that kind of info on to my students, and I'm glad to get kind of a hopeful outlook. So we're going to sneak in one last audience question. This is from Skip, who is a fellow Darden grad, class of 91. Skip is curious to hear, I guess briefly, because we've only got a couple minutes, about what aspect of your Darden education you think best prepared you for your current role, and specifically for what you've experienced these last 9 to 12 months.
Oh my God, I'm gonna give like the trite, like textbook answer that everyone says, like LO, of course. It's like LO, of course, right? Like this entire pandemic has been all about how you lead teams through a crisis. So I would say that course, but more, not even really just the course, obviously. I feel like the experience, right? The entire part of the Darden experience and navigating through challenges without having all of the information and then needing to figure, make a quick decision. I think those are the aspects that come to mind and resonate.
I'm going to say something different. controversial as a people leader. The course when I was there was called DA. I think before that it was QA. So data analysis, quantitative analysis. And I have been my own analyst this year and have had to use that to inform a lot of decisions and a lot of like important decisions because we laid off our whole data team. Shocking. So, you know, it's funny because it is all about people at the end of the day. And I've thought about this question myself. I also think I maybe when I was at Darden lacked the maturity to get as much out of the LO or organizational behavior courses I had not really managed before. And so I don't think a lot of it like landed with me at the time. So I didn't end up retaining it. But I think the like data orientation and the ability to weed through, you know, tens of thousands of lines of data to figure out what it can tell us about making a decision. It's part of why I was one of the people that got to stay. And it helped me like lead us, especially on the cancellation side.
Great. I find those, again, really interesting answers in that oftentimes, to Sarah's point, especially teaching undergraduate students, we see students that don't really appreciate the importance, right, of leadership skills and of organizational skills and of, you know, informed decision-making that actually integrates quantitative analysis. And so I'll be taking this snippet of our conversation and sending it to my students ahead of the course I teach in the spring to say, I hope you're paying attention.
I tell them all to learn SQL.
So we are just about out of time. I want to close with, I think, hopefully a fun question and a lighthearted question. So once it's safe to travel freely again, where will your first vacation trip take each of you?
Oh my gosh, I have a trip. I say have because it's not canceled yet, but it's about to be. I have a trip planned to Greece in May to celebrate my 10-year wedding anniversary. That's likely not happening at this point. So I am going to, that will likely be my first big trip because I need to reschedule that once it's safe to travel. Big ones, smaller ones, I'll do something domestic, obviously.
You know, this is, I would have said France. And then in an epitome of a pandemic experience, I met a guy in September and he got transferred to Toronto for a year. Border's still closed. So I will probably travel to Canada. It's very exciting. And then maybe one day France.
Both great places.
Thank you so much. Both of those sound like fabulous, very lovely trips that have a nice emotional core to them, which I think for me, at least, is a big part I'm missing of traveling is the emotional connection of that experience. And I've really appreciated the points that you've hit on today. They were fantastic. It was wonderful to get an inside look at the hospitality industry. So thank you, Christy and Jacqueline and Sarah, for sharing this time with us and to the audience who joined us. And I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon and you dream of your next travel destination.
My pleasure. Thank you. Nice talking to everyone.
Yes.